All right, welcome everyone to Lean On Navy. We took a break over the month of December. Hope everyone had a chance over the holidays to get reset. And what brings us together today is to hear kind of a Forrest Gump story. I have to tell you, when I got to meet Lieutenant Andrea Howard for the first time, and she was kind of giving me her background, I literally thought I was replaying the story of Forrest Gump. She's been in so many incredible places all at once, and we'll get to hear her story. And for those of you who are new to Lean On Navy, I'm just going to start out with a little introduction to tell you what Lean On Navy is all about and what we do. And that would be the song I'm not going to play because I learned that it didn't work. But this is the agenda. So for those of you who come every month, this looks familiar. And if this is your first time, you can expect that we'll be on for about an hour. I take about 5 minutes to kick it off and explain what we're all about. We're all about mentorship and connection. So that's what we're all about. Primarily from
Emily,
yes,
your
go
screen
ahead.
is just blank black. Is that what you're seeing as well?
Let me stop the share. Thank you for that. I'll try again. Appreciate that.
It looked like something was trying to load, but it wasn't on there.
Oh, really? Okay, so let's go back and I'll go to share screen. Let's see. Share screen, and there we go. Safari share, and tell me if that is any better. Does anyone see that? Andrea, can you give me a thumbs up?
It showed for a little bit.
A moment, yeah, and then it immediately stopped.
Okay, stop share. Let's try again. One last try, but I'll just kind of talk through as we're doing this. Basically, the idea is we get a couple minutes where I'm going to introduce what we're all about, and then we take about 5 minutes to introduce the topic and the guest speaker. And then we're going to have about 20 minutes where we'll listen to Andrea's story. And then we'll get a chance to have breakout rooms. And during those breakout rooms, let's see, screen sharing right now. What if I went? Does that work this time? Your screen sharing? All good? Okay, fantastic. Thanks. And then we will, pause for 20 minutes. We'll go on mute for those 20 minutes while we listen to our presentation, and then come back for a group question and answer. And then we'll go into breakout rooms, and I'll share those questions here shortly. And then about 20 minutes of Q&A, and then wrap up. That'll put us about the hour. And from there, we have what's called the after party. So if you're still wanting more and we have more time, then we stop the recording and let some after conversations happen if people have time. But basic protocol is ask you to select speaker view on your screen. Please log off at any time. Distractions come up. We are recording this. The secret sauce of why these, I think, go so well is because the audience is so engaged and because the audience is interacting and listening and giving our feedback to the speaker as she's sharing her story. And if you find that something comes up that prevents you from doing that, then just log off, totally fine, and ask you to stay on mute unless I call on you. I do have 3 resources there. If you want to go to the website, that's where we hang all past recordings. I'm also happy to have you come to Facebook to continue the conversation. And always like to link cleader.org. That's the nonprofit for the professional development of women in uniform. And many of you know I'm the president of SSLA. So our guest speaker, I'm so excited to introduce, well, actually, before I introduce you, Andrea, I'm going to go ahead and ask people to just introduce them, to take a minute and see who's in the room. So one thing I like to do is I call these kind of guest polls. But if you have a moment, we like to kind of look around the room and see who else is here. So I just invite you to go into chat and maybe introduce yourself. I'll just, your name already kind of comes up, but you can just say where you are. So I'm going to put down that I'm in Seattle, Washington, and I'm going to put down that I'm a SWO nuke, and I work for ComNav Air Forces, and I'm the N9, which means the Force Nuclear Propulsion Officer. So that's a little bit about me. And if anybody else wants to take a minute just to say where they are and wants to say maybe their job, or at least the professional development perspective. Some of us are coming from jobs or going to jobs. That's fine. Just what do you want people to know about you in this room so that we can foster connection, which is one of the many, many reasons people come to these Lean On sessions. So invite you to put your name in chat there, and then also invite you throughout the session to chat with people. That's part of the reason we do this. And I'm happy later to connect anybody who might have seen some background that would be helpful to them as we all attempt to connect with one another so that we can all be better individually. So with that, now I have the pleasure of introducing our guest speaker. And it's just, like I said, so exciting, our first interaction. I really was not kidding. She actually was in the UK when Brexit was decided, and that kind of topped it all off. I was like, okay, on top of you being, accepted to the Naval Academy just as Don't Ask, Don't Tell was being repealed, which, that makes me think that that's your normal, right? So many of us had to kind of adapt, but I would like to think of it as your maybe normal, and what that might look like for you. And I'll tell you, one of the first responses I got when I sent the invitation out for your presentation, Andrea, was from Admiral Adams, who I see is on. Good to see you. Who just shared, gosh, I was the first flag officer who was openly married to a woman, or married to a woman and to a same sex as a flag officer. And now people are joining, and that's their normal. And it just gave me chills to think, gosh, there's legacy here, there's story here. My first captain in the Navy was a woman, and I just thought that was normal because I just happened to be on a commanding officer. My commanding officer was Captain Michelle Howard, commander. I thought that was normal. So our normals are sometimes defined by how things are when we enter. So love to hear the perspective of how you've been part of so much cultural change, and then to be assigned to two different crews as they were ordered to integrate not just officers, but enlisted, and what that challenge might be like. So I don't want to steal the thunder from you. I just really want to hear your story, and over to you.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much for having me here. I'll have to give a couple of special shout outs before I begin. Number one goes to my mom, who's in attendance. So Marlene Cooker, who's given everyone a little wave. I always am so flattered when she gets the opportunity schedule-wise to hop on and see me share a little bit more of my story. We always joke that we speak a different language when it comes to our career paths. She was a high school teacher, and I'm doing this Navy thing, but each time that she attends one of these events, we get a little bit more common language, and it helps for her to see your questions. So thank you in advance. I'm going to call out as well Chief Whitney Bullock, who was on my sister crew on USS Ohio. There's an indescribable narrative of how strange our tour was, battling a 40-year-old submarine in the midst of novel challenges like COVID-19. And Chief Bullock was one of the people who was boots on the ground leading that fight. And, we always talk about how as officers, how the chiefs impact us and make us better leaders. And even from an opposite crew, Chief Bullock certainly did that. So I have to give her a special Ohio shout out. And then to the person who facilitated this opportunity in many ways for me to be here, 9 years down the road from an interview on April 15th, 2014, who remembers that and was a little scarred from the day, just me most likely, but it's great to have Admiral Richardson on here as well, considering that he accepted me into the Naval Nuclear Propulsion Program. And sir, thanks for being on today. We really appreciate it.
One of my best decisions.
I appreciate that, sir. So like a good nuke, to assuage the Admiral's fears if he thinks it might have been a bad decision, I'm going to start with how I kind of crafted this conversation for today, and have to start with the base references. That's Nuclear Power 101. So I looked at the formatting of a couple of other really inspiring ladies who've been on recently, and that's Lieutenant Commander Amber Cohen and Lieutenant Christina Denai. I encourage you to watch their chats if you haven't had the opportunity yet, because the authenticity that they bring is what has inspired me to be a little bit more open than I've probably been in one of these public conversations. As for my story and the structure, based off their formatting, I looked to retired Navy Commander David Smith, who's the co-author of Athena Rising. He recently interviewed me for an updated chapter in the book, Inclusion in the Military, who's doing a profiling of an LGBTQ active duty service member. And I'm a humanities major by trade, so I love metaphors. I always have to have a good metaphor. And he was the one who in conversation said, you know, your story really sounds a lot like Forrest Gump. You just happen to kind of stumble into the right place at the right time. And so I kind of clung to that and have used that as really the thesis then behind this conversation. And then for the overall energy of this chat, I'm just trying to aspire to be at the same level as Captain Bassett. I can't thank you enough, you know, for this network that you have facilitated and for everyone in attendance who gets to reap the benefits of your hard work. So we'll dive in. 3 steps to how Forrest Gump has been successful. And so step 1 for him is being in the right place, right? So I have a ton of gratitude for the places that I've been, like I said, where I wound up in as a starting point, the right place. So for Forrest Gump, that's him running his way into a college scholarship that then leads him to be part of the desegregation of the University of Alabama in 1963. And then as another very characteristic moment from the movie, he's in DC with his ping pong team after visiting China, and he's the person who calls in the Watergate break-in. So, you know, that's a scene that resonates with me because, again, he just happens to be in the right place. So for me and my story, that begins with my hometown, Norcross, Georgia, which is in Metro Atlanta. And I will always allege that it was one of the best places that I could have grown up in the United States, a true cultural patchwork quilt with ethnicities representing the whole globe. I have this catchphrase from that time. It's a Groucho Marx paradox where he says, again and again, I don't want to belong to any club that will accept people like me as a member. But in my case, I was lucky they always did. So I could, as an ethnic and as a religious minority in this Metro Atlantic public school system, just walk between lunch tables and get this little taste of foreignness and that feeling of being an outsider in a club, but putting in the work and time to become a part of that club would come up again and again in the Navy. So where that really took off then is in 2011 when I started at Annapolis and began my journey through the Naval Academy. And to structure the place and the changes that were happening at that time, I'd like to put it through the lens of what I call this like submarine mythology of that year. And there were 3 dramatic changes that happened concurrently. The first is that Don't Ask, Don't Tell was repealed, allowing openly queer sailors to serve aboard these war machines. Secondly, women were admitted into the community, you know, and were beginning to report to these training commands in Charleston and onwards then to the boat themselves in subsequent years. And then third, sailors were forbidden from smoking on submarines. One of the changes rocked the boat more than the others. And if you've ever served on a submarine, then there is no doubt that it's the monster drinking, caffeine related, you know, removal of this nicotine source that just blew their minds. You know, it was their crutch for 6 or then what became 8-hour watches. And on the really tough days, I remind myself that just over 1 short decade ago, the reality of serving on a submarine as a woman, as an openly queer person, wouldn't be possible. So, you know, step 1 is being in the right place. And, you know, even if the sailors will still allege it was a better place with cigarettes and, you know, smoking underway, but it's just being in the right place at that starting point. So then step 2 is, you know, for Forrest Gump, being with the right people. You have to have the serendipity, not only be in the right place, but be with the right people. So for him, you know, 1952, Elvis Presley stays at his mom's house and he teaches him how to do his, you know, notorious hip dance for Hound Dog, or he meets John Legend on a talk show and inspires the song Imagine, then meets 3 presidents, you know, once as an All-American for the football with JFK, then he receives his Medal of Honor from Lyndon B. Johnson, and then meets with President Nixon after his ping pong team's successes in China. So right people for me in serendipity. I would be totally remiss if I didn't mention, you know, meeting my wife was the most serendipitous part of my life. So she won a Rhodes Scholarship in 2016. I won a Marshall Scholarship in 2015. So during my 2nd year in the UK and her first, we ended up doing the same program at the University of Oxford, and then there's 36 colleges. And so we just happened to also wind up at the same college. So if ever the universe was pushing me towards another person, I think the obvious signs were there. So I always, you know, allege that in some ways I could be the luckiest person on the planet because we defied I call it the 0.0007% odds of meeting, you know, that year, those scholarships at that college. And I'll still say too that, I'm also super lucky because she texts me a picture of a lucky duck before every Navy test I've ever taken in my career. And then for things like this, I get nervous. So she sends me a little lucky duck picture too. So she's fantastic. And that's the main thing I think many of us can reflect upon, being the serendipity of a lifetime is meeting that fantastic partner. But people-wise too, and I already referenced this a little bit by calling out Chief Bullock. I've had the fortune of being just with tremendous people in the right place for the two commands that I've served on for submarines. So that's been USS Ohio Blue, which was SSGN 726. And now I'm the navigator on PCU New Jersey SSN 796. So the oldest operational submarine in the fleet to hopefully the next that will be delivered to the fleet, something poetic there. But with that, I have been the first department head, the first submarine officer to integrate two different submarines with junior enlisted women. I'm also the senior lesbian in the submarine force. And, I want to talk a little bit more about, in particular with this junior enlisted integration, what the role is of these queer women on board, because it's like such a unique and new story that's coming about, because this is the first large scale gender integration post Don't Ask, Don't Tell. So I wanted to tell a quick aside about being with the right people and how that's really played out in this post Don't Ask, Don't Tell environment. At various points during my first tour on Ohio, as the operational safety officer, the assistant engineer, the reactor control assistant, but my favorite billet wasn't included on any fit rep, but it made all the difference in my job satisfaction and in the experience of a lot of these women. I was the coach of what we colloquially called the softball team. And softball team consisted of these queer women across nearly every division on board the submarine. And we would meet in what we called home base, or the office, which was the aft women's head, the only restroom area that was specifically designated for the junior enlisted women use. And there are two topics that I want to highlight about their role on board. The first was that they were all what we would call hot runners in the submarine community. They'd fought for their spots to get into the submarine force, and then no one could really question the merit of their work or their awards. Despite their, what I would call crass senses of humor, they raised the professionalism overall, and they kept me in their loop as their coach if there was anything that needed higher attention. Number two, though, is that they really had each other's backs and the backs of other sailors that were in need. So despite their incomparable contributions for a smooth transition with a gender enlisted crew, there were still times when they were not treated fairly, whether that was receiving harder checkouts than some of the guys, or having certain chiefs who refused to engage with them in kind of professional development or personal well-being because the chiefs felt uncomfortable, talking to women sailors when they themselves were not women. We were confined to the base in Pearl Harbor for 2 months during COVID-19. These women threw nearly nightly tailgates in the parking lot just beyond the gates of the shipyard. So they were really the community ralliers. One of the girls started drawing caricatures of all of them. Another wrote these really cheeky songs about the group in the boat on her guitar. One hand-sewed pillowcases for all of them with their favorite Disney princesses. They made me Snow White because they said that, I was kind of the mother hen of all of them running around and doing their shenanigans. And then when one of the male-born sailors came out as trans, they saved her life because they brought her into the fold, and they would drive up once we were allowed to leave base to the North Shore and give her space to dress up as herself and be her true self. And they, more than anybody that I've had the privilege of working with, of Forrest Gump stumbling into a group of people, they more than anyone else have embodied this American ideal of diversity, inclusion, dignity, and respect. And now the nice thing, in having been with that group of people and now having, been placed by the Navy with this group of women that's starting to roll into New Jersey, I'm hoping to do the same as the navigator for New Jersey. So talk about, not just being in the right place with timing wise, but with the right people. What an opportunity it is to get to be with these junior enlisted women as we're integrating the first Virginia class submarine. So 2 submarines integrating junior enlisted women. I'm so thankful for that opportunity. And then comes Forrest Gump's third step to success, which is not only being in the right place with the right people, because you only get so far by showing up to the right place with the right people, The third is then making the right investments. So for Forrest Gump, he earned his Medal of Honor because he was the right person to be in Vietnam with his platoon, and then had the speed to run back and forth and save, his land-based shipmates. He then founds Bubba Gump Shrimp Company with Lieutenant Dan, who promises sort of cheekily to be his first mate, but ends up coming along with him. And then they have the serendipity, though, of a hurricane that leaves just their one boat and makes them rich. But then Lieutenant Dan takes it a step forward and invests in Apple Computer once it goes public in December of 1980 and helps build this whole wealth enterprise. So it's not just enough to have right place, right people. You have to go the last step and make those investments that are going to pay the long-term dividends, and be bold, be creative, be willing to take the riskier steps. In doing that, though, in approaching this theme, I think it's really important to talk about bad investments that have been made by the majority into the minority, despite the serendipity of maybe having these conditions where people are in the right place and then, they're at the right time with the right people. And I was telling Captain Bassett before this that I was really inspired listening to Lieutenant Commander Amber Cohen's story as preparation for this, because that was really the first time that I had heard somebody who's at the executive officer level of women in submarines open up about some of the bad experiences that they have had in those bad investments. And so why do I want to cover that specifically before I talk about people from the majority or from within the minority making those good investments? Well, I can give a very specific example of the effects of not doing so. So in August of past year, right after I finished department head school, I showed up at a Women in Submarines, a Women Accessions event at the Naval Academy. And it's fantastic. I have friends who are there on shore duty who organize these events for women and others who are interested in submarines, but with predominantly women submarine panelists, women submariner panelists, so that they can ask in this unfettered forum any questions and get some raw answers. And the first question was, very straightforward. Have you been treated differently during your time in submarines? Like, what challenges have you faced as women in submarines? And we deferred to the most senior person in the room at the time. And she, to her credit, is one of the most bubbly and heartwarming people. And it sounds like she was able to be at this really fantastic first command before she then transitioned out of the Navy. And she said, there is no real hardship. There is no real difference. It's all about the competency that you bring to the team. And, as long as you can say the words, "I relieve you," and go on watch, like that's what matters. And that's what the guys really resonate with. And that's all that you really need to succeed in this community. And then the conversation pivoted to the next girl down the line, who was one of the most junior of the panelists. And I know that she had not had the most pleasant junior officer tour, but she echoed those sentiments and didn't open up about the reality of her experience, because what that implied was that there was something wrong with her if she had a tougher time than this other person had just expressed. And that's a misplaced, responsibility for that experience. So, then it shifts to me, and I offer a polite counterpoint where I say, that's fantastic that there are these women who have had those experiences, and that's the ideal that we're aspiring for. However, I've had XYZ kind of, instances in my career where I haven't felt exactly part of the team, but I've leveraged it to help set more professionalism or to create stronger bonds with other people in the minority. So it is important, though, to, give folks the backup in the space to acknowledge that it's not always good, that sometimes you are going to feel othered, and that there are bad things that come from that, but also good things that can come from that. And then I felt validated because Kayla Barron joined about 10 minutes later and affirmed that she too had had some negative experiences on her first submarine. So it certainly helped in my case to have the astronaut kind of side with my perspective. And I wasn't too mad that, I got a little forceful backup from one of our biggest role models of the Women in Submarines movement. But all to say is that, I've had this progression where I've become more cognizant of the symptoms of bad investments. And I'm sure many of the senior women and senior men in this room who progressed through their careers did some of that diagnostics and were able to identify that. So just specific examples for me of the bad side was, being at Annapolis, where I wasn't even recognizing that sometimes these scenarios existed, where people weren't trying to invest in me and were actually writing me off. So for instance, there's an internal scholarship process where you can get funding for graduate school from the Naval Academy. And it wasn't until 10 years later, I found out that one of the admirals who sat my panel really didn't like me, and another panelist who I've stayed close with informed me that I never really had a shot at this internal scholarship because the admiral commandeered the interview, drove in on kind of an inconsequential question, and took up 2/3 of the time of this interview. So I never really had a chance. But at the time, I didn't even notice that that was unusual, and I didn't have the context to believe that that type of situation could really result. Then going through the nuclear pipeline, that's when I started to identify it a bit more and felt helpless to talk about these realities. So at the nuclear power training unit in Charleston, South Carolina, there was one civilian instructor who just notoriously would grade women more harshly than men on their evaluated watches. But we didn't really feel like we had a leg to stand on because there is such a subjective nature to those watches. So that was really tough because, we saw this trend analysis, but didn't really have the data or felt like we had the voices as students to say anything or advocate for a change. And then, I got to USS Ohio, my first command, and that's where I think I really became fully aware of some of these bad investments. So, one of the biggest red flags that I've seen and I've heard from other women in submarines is if you try to, as a woman, bring up a bad situation to the chain of command. In my instance, I did this as, there was a woman who was dealing with some certain mental health and sexual assault related, happenstances. And so I tried to bring up these issues to the chain of command, and then got told that, that these viewpoints that I had of her were the result of a personality disagreement rather than me trying to advocate for help on her behalf. So personality disagreements are a very easy write-off that a chain of command can have towards a woman who's trying to bring up an issue that's more professional or, personal well-being related. I got advised by a lieutenant commander in an aviation role who's become a very close mentor that sometimes, and I quote, integrity is not the right answer when you are a minority in the Navy. That's super hard to hear from the perspective of a nuclear trained officer. And what she meant by that is that if you are going to bring up the truth, but it's not a healthy chain of command, then sometimes you might be facing retaliation in that situation. So I still don't regret what I did, but it was kind of an interesting insight into the retaliation that can happen. But then there was also a senior member of my chain of command who said sometimes a small lie about performance is easier than telling the truth and delivering a performance feedback to a minority member of the command, who then, found out from other sources that what the captain had said didn't match the reality of the situation. So, it's just tough when you see that you as a minority can be hurt by telling the truth, but that sometimes your leadership might use deviations from the truth to protect themselves. So all to say is that, there are these tough examples to see where people are making bad investments in these minority members. But on the converse, there's also these very good examples of ways that people have personally invested in me. And that's kind of what I want to highlight and then use to transition into, questions for you all. I called two of my professors at the Naval Academy, my Naval Academy dads, and both of them were at my wedding. And they also, they always described to me that my journey through Annapolis, which I didn't really, again, even identify at the time, was swimming upstream. And they were like, we are your biggest cheerleaders and we'll provide, a little tugboat by you as required as you're trying to swim upstream and, swim against the current. And I don't have any tattoos, but if I ever get one, maybe swimming upstream will have to be included in that. I was part of the first submarine crew to get impacted with COVID-19, and it was in a concurrent timeline as the Theodore Roosevelt was impacted. And even though that scenario was incredibly difficult, by being in the right place at the right time with sailors who were investing in each other so keenly, I got these very, important deck plate lessons about not treating sailors like statistics and making them feel heard and, flexing as much as you can, even when you feel like the larger Navy policies are confining and maybe not even in your best interests. At the level where I've attained now in the submarine community, I've been able to, benefit from just pure mentorship. A bunch of department head women and I have formed the Submarine Officer Women Network. And we've been able to connect about 300 submarine officers that identify as female. And oh my goodness, is that just an inspiring number to see that there are that many of us who now exist and can share that conversation. I was able to be part of Dr. Charles Barber's DEI listening group within the Navy. And that's, again, another leader who was investing in the community and listening to us and making direct change on the Department of the Navy's policies for things related to healthcare and billeting and, the various issues that define a career. And now the tables have really turned where I feel like I'm able to start investing in other people, so it's not just me being invested in by being in the right place, right time, right people, but also starting to invest in others. And it really came to a head, I think, for both my wife and for me this past spring when we attended a submarine birthday ball up in Groton, Connecticut. My wife recounted the interaction that we had on LinkedIn. And the irony is that she's very anti-social media, and she's called LinkedIn, the cancer of our generation. And so still though, even she engages every once in a while. So she did her, maybe annual post on LinkedIn or so, but she detailed that this junior enlisted woman came up to us halfway through the evening and said it was the first time that she had ever seen two women together at a formal Navy function. And it meant so much for her to see someone like her in the Navy openly dancing with her partner. My wife wrote, that put everything in perspective for me. And she wrote it in June. So she said, this Pride Month, I'm proud to be queer. I'm proud of my wife and all those who serve. And I'm proud to be a queer military spouse. And this post, like I said, it went viral. So it had over 1 million engagements. And yeah, I mean, just the impact of that was beyond anything that she could have expected. But to just see the way that, strangers were also rallying around this experience that this, 18-year-old woman up at sub school just beginning her journey, just to see the response to that and how, that kind of gives everyone a little bit of hope was really inspiring. And then even in this tour already, I had the opportunity to ride USS Indiana for the submarine command course that all of the prospective executive officers and commanding officers go through. And it was a tremendous experience because, the command there has just embraced the women riders that they've taken from pre-commissioning units up in Groton and has made it seem like, again, a non-issue that they're on board. One of them is, again, openly queer, and it's just not even something that she thinks about as she manages her experience on board what is otherwise an all-male submarine. And, in some ways, in a very positive sense, they're blowing up this Women in Submarines plan, which is lagging some of the shipyard deliveries. So the plan that we have to integrate these future boats, like it takes a few good guys, good commanders, good lieutenant commanders on a boat that are willing to take risks and, bring in people outside of the existing regulations and push back on those to hopefully improve and inform them. So, I'm now in a position where I can engage in this conversation, maybe even about mixed gender integration in birthing. And so there's very exciting challenges that are going to be coming to a head in these next few years. And, on the one piece, it's women in submarines. And then the other side of my story is that I've been in 4 different shipyard environments now in 4 years. And that's the other large quagmire that we've had for, our community and for the surface community. And so, I'm hoping, again, that being positioned in that right place in that right time and the investments that I'm making and learning all these different shipyard structures, even though it's not what I would necessarily want to be doing at this point in my career, I'm sure that will pay dividends down the road. So I've been, beating the point in of Forrest Gump's 3 points to success of right place, right time, right people, right investments. And I guess the question that I posit as we get ready to break is, there's this balance theme of how much do we talk about being different versus being, that ideal uniformity. And, the folks in my position have these big questions of, will I screen for the next levels of my career if my merit's not the only factor that's being considered? If yes, will my family be treated equally? And it's when these questions cross our mind, how then do we get more women and more queer flag officers? And the reality is that we're just not all as lucky as Forrest Gump. But that is why I am so grateful for groups like this that foster the same conditions so that we can have at least more Forrest Gump-esque stories come down the line.
Thank you so much, Andrea. It's so great. One thing I just love about your stories is the context that you provide. So it's like, yeah, there's this personality conflict here, and this teacher or this person who gave us checkouts that was unfair to us here. These are real stories and they're real examples. But then you do so much to provide context to say, oh, and then when we posted on LinkedIn, we got 1 million supporters. Or when I had another person on the panel show up, it turned out that the first person who spoke was not speaking for the whole group. There's more than one perspective. So one of the things I love about your stories is that you give us not just some of the friction and some of the challenges, but also some of that really beautiful context that says, yeah, cultural change is messy and not everybody can just shift it to the next culture. But it takes time. It takes bathroom parties, or what did you call them? When your first home base, it takes sometimes it takes a home base in a bathroom in a head, or maybe it takes a tailgating party, or maybe it takes a place where people can go dress in the clothes that match their gender, off in some safe place, but then we go back to work and we can say, I relieve you, and be like that one person who on that panel and say, I relieve you, you do the job professionally. And you do it just fine. There's no issue here. There's no there, right? But you don't get there without all that just really, I'll just call it awesome context that you provided of people like you, and not just like you in any way, people who are willing like you to have open conversations and to be themselves. So that's what I take away. And I love it. I just love that you would share these stories. So thank you very much.
Yes, ma'am. And thank you again for the opportunity to share them. It's like we chatted about in our very first conversation, it's the patchwork quilt of mentorship that makes these opportunities possible. And, I hope I did an adequate job of highlighting the role of so many other wonderful women and men mentors throughout my journey to be able to speak about these things now openly and confidently.
That's right, Andrea. Beyond adequate job. You have given everyone here and me, and I'll just share my experience listening to you, an opportunity to really be inspired by all the effort that goes on, behind closed doors. I had no idea that kind of mentorship circle would be happening. And of course it has to happen. Of course, that's the only way. That's what these circles are all about too, is people just sharing their stories with each other. And to hear how much you were willing to share more today by having listened to previous speakers. So it's contagious. So with that contagion, I would like to offer us to go into breakout rooms and share kind of a takeaway. And we have a couple questions here. I can see if I'll cut and paste them, but those of you who haven't been in breakout rooms in the past, this is how they work, is that there'll be about 4 of you per room. And I'll attempt to fix them if people are dropping off at all. But you'll have it in chat that it will go in ABC order by first name. So when you get to your breakout room, just accept it and then go around the room. Whoever's got the first name, you introduce yourself, maybe talk about where you are. And we actually have 3 questions, because I had Andrea just offered us how much do we talk about uniformity? That can be, if you want to share that question, like how much do we try to be uniform if we are in a service or on a team that wants uniformity? Or is there a cultural change that you've witnessed in your time that you want to talk about? So those are the 2 kind of questions that I'm kind of posing for you to share. And you pick one or both in your group. And other than that, then maybe just a takeaway. It's really a chance for everyone to chat. Not everyone follows these rules anyway. I've learned over time. These questions are just an idea. So any questions? Anyone want to come off mute and ask a question before we break out?
Would you repeat your 3 questions again?
For sure. Okay, because I did put them in chat, but there are 3 different questions. One is, how much do we talk about uniformity? And that was Andrea's question. Like, hey, if you're part of a team that wants you to be uniform, do you try to be uniform, or do you try to talk about your differences? Another question would be, what major cultural change have you witnessed? So have you been there for any of these changes, or the changes we talked about today where don't ask, don't tell? We talked about the change to women in integration in submarines. Any change that you might have been part of, it would be a COVID change to a policy, any cultural change that you might say, yeah, this story makes sense, because cultural change is hard and sometimes people don't get it. And there are personality conflicts. And then the third question would be, do you have a takeaway? Just one takeaway. If neither one of those two questions resonates with you, maybe you could say, gosh, what I learned from today's reflections were something. Is that helpful, Bob? Thank you. Okay. So with that, I'm going to open all rooms. I'll time it for 10 minutes. Please accept your room. And I will do my best to fix rooms of people who if you find there's only one or two, I'll reassign you quickly if someone ends up in a room alone, given that some people have to leave. Everyone for coming back. I apologize in advance for those of you that I interrupted rudely. There's really no gracious way to do that. So apologies. I was not graceful. I did learn there's a new thing I could have done, but chose not to. There's a new feature in Zoom that I could have been the voice of God and I could have broadcast and spoken over every room. I did not use that. I was tempted, but I didn't. Maybe the next time. So with that, does anyone want to share anything that came from their breakout session?
I'll share. Everybody, we had two, including me, two other people with excellent backgrounds on this. I think a couple of takeaways we had was, one is culture change is important, and there's just, you can't change a law or a regulation and poof, everything's taken care of. Hearing your story, Andrea, is just a reminder of how much has changed, but how much more still has to happen. And it reminds us as leaders what else we can do to foster an environment where culture change can evolve. And it's not just one-on-one relationships or small group relationships, but fostering openness. And the importance of unknown cheerleaders. Sometimes maybe we need to, as cheerleaders, let ourselves be known a little bit better, but what important role they play in us. And lastly, I just personally say, hearing you say you're a senior lesbian in the submarine force, I'm going to tell that to so many people as a gay woman myself who served as a flag officer. I should have said myself as a senior openly gay lesbian in the surface force, because after I came out, while others didn't come out, two other admirals came out to me, and a third one told me of his brother who was gay, and all of it fostered great conversations. So over.
Love it. Thank you. Thank you, Admiral Adams, and thank you for all those cheerleaders who are, fostering openness, and some of us more open cheerleaders than others, and so great. And how culture change and policy have a hard time keeping up, but it's worthy effort to do.
Emily, the only thing I was going to add to what the Admiral said is I really kind of was touched by the statement I think the Admiral put out of, it's one thing to have diversity, but you really need to have inclusion and leadership at multiple levels, actively trying to include everybody and give everybody the opportunity to shine and hold everybody equally accountable. Because if you do that, that's how people's opinions or prejudices change when they see, oh, you could do equally well. So the difference between forced diversity and inclusion by leadership, I thought it was a great point. Over.
Oh, thanks, Adam. So great. Great to hear from you. Wonderful. Stacy, go ahead. See your hands up.
Okay, so for our group, for one, it hit home for me. I think I chatted, but I just wanted to say, as one of the first women back in the nuclear program with 7 of us in MARF, we also had bathroom get-togethers where we would all sit in the bathroom and chat about things. So it's just kind of funny how related, unrelated that happens. And we definitely talked a lot about, especially how it becomes the new normal, which is good. But we also kind of hit on the, how much do we care about uniformity? And that is something that, we've talked about a lot. And I think unity and diversity is important within a team, and that uniformity is important, but it's different than uniformity of thought, look, and perspective, which is good thing we're getting more towards. And I wish I could have spent another hour talking about culture, because man, is that a hot topic with me, but didn't have time to get to it. But I just wanted to say that I really appreciate the fact that things are becoming a little bit more normal in terms of, okay, let's look at other perspectives. Over.
I love it. Yeah, those bathroom talks. And now that you're in command, you're probably able to foster more of those openly that conversations that had to be in the background before.
Emily, I had a great group with Jim, Jewel, and got reunited with Sid Mertz, which was very exciting. Got to hear about her new job, and as Stacy was just talking about change management, and that's big on Sid's mind. And I think kind of our pivotal conversation was she's taking a company that's the old ancestral company and bringing it into the modern age and being the change management lead, helping to shape the leadership there, and probably not lose the greatness of the grocery store. And I don't want to misspeak to what Sid's doing, but move it into the modern century and harness all that great energy. So, and then with Jim, he was the XO on the Yosemite back when the integration of women occurred, which was really cool. So our group really talked about transitions and change and how you deal with that. And is it important to have that uniformity? And again, I wish we could have fleshed more of this out again from Sid's experience. But with Jim, the comment is we don't have men or women on this ship. This was what his Command Master Chief, I believe, said, is we have sailors. And I had a similar experience on my very first ship in 1992 before combat restriction was lifted, where my CO, when he welcomed me on board, had me sitting down. He had this giant manual. It was like, I don't know, about 8 inches thick about women at sea. And he had it right on his desk, looming in front of me. And he said, well, see what I'm going to do with this? He goes, this is what the Navy says I need to know about to have you on board this ship amongst the other small handful of women. And he said, I'm going to do, and Jim reminded me the term, I'm deep sixing it. And he shoved it off his desk right into the trash can. And same type of comment. He was like, sailors are sailors. And, obviously there's few things that we started getting to the story where pregnancy at sea or different things that you might need to have policy and regulation from the Navy and how to handle things. But by and large, I thought that was really good same thing when I was out on my ship Stennis when Don't Ask, Don't Tell was repealed. And we had to go through all the training right before we deployed. And everybody was worried we were going to be one of the first ships out at sea when this happened. And there was all this gnashing of teeth and angst and concern. And we all did the training. We went out at sea. We were on deployment when it was repealed. And it was a big nothing burger. Because again, it's good order and discipline, treating sailors like sailors. And it wasn't an issue at all, as much as people would have thought. I think to Andrea's point, because she was talking about the submarine world, the big 3 changes that happen at once. And so I think, again, good leadership, good order and discipline, strong, engaged leaders help prevail. And they don't need to make everybody look the same, but treat people with equal respect. Sailor's a sailor type idea, I think still has some good, strong merit there.
I love it. I love it. I love how you recapped it. I think I'll have to look up. I think, Jim, your book is called Steel Decks and Class Ceilings. I think, is that right?
Yes.
Right. So, Jim's an author and has written about that very experience.
And it was the one that we talked about today. So
yeah. So many stories, right? I think your story is you were there for, women being first integrated on your ship, and, look how many years later, and just so many different stories, but the themes are so similar because it's about culture.
This has been just a wonderful experience for me because it sees that we have progressed, and I forget her name. She's the retired admiral at the War College, Leadership and Ethics, and she said, "Yeah, she was just terrific." I went up and talked to them about the book, and she said it's an innovation and inclusion, and that's what we have to keep as we move forward. And it looks to me like we're moving forward, and that's very rewarding.
Love it. Thank you. Admiral Richardson, sir, please.
Yeah, no, thanks for letting me talk. I don't know how much of the after party I'm going to have to be able to stick around for, but Andrea, thanks so much for your perspective. I was the commander of the submarine force when we did those 3 changes. I shared that a little bit in our breakout room, but Stacy was so much more thoughtful than my story. That thanks for taking the lead for our group. Andrea, you have it exactly right. And I would say, just to leverage off of what Kristen said, it went beyond just like, hey, let's all treat, a sailor as a sailor, because I think that, if you scratch that's good on a bumper sticker, but if we scratch below that, every sailor's a little bit different, right? And it goes to Stacy's point of unity with diversity, right? Unity of diversity, which creates a much more powerful team. And that's an interesting bumper sticker too. But I'm always compelled, like, okay, so what do we do, right? What do we actually do? And something that's become clear is that the best performing teams, and particularly the ones that achieve unity and excellence in diversity, are the ones where the team members commit not just to treating each other with respect, which is kind of code for let's not disrespect one another. That gets you to the zero axis, right? You've come up out of the negative behaviors and you've reached zero, but they go beyond that to actually do everything they can to affirm and support one another. They actively look for ways to advance and mentor, look for opportunities for one another, right? And so, that's what I think is the key. That's something that we can actually take on and do, is look for these opportunities to support one another. And that's everybody on the team, right? That's people who are like us, and maybe it's more comfortable there, but it's also people who are different than us and lend so much, right? Shining bright lights into our blind spots. And so we just need to encourage one another and break above that zero axis into sort of the positive behaviors that make each other stronger. The teams that do that, particularly if they're diverse teams, it actually leverages all that diversity and it moves beyond inclusion into belonging, right? Where everybody on that team says, man, I really feel welcome and like I belong here. So, for all of you still working on this really important challenge and problem, Andrea, you talked about, hey, it's now time for you to take charge and make a difference in this area. I just encourage you to pass on that simple thing, right? If you just come and look for ways to make everybody around you better, we break into a region of true excellence, where everybody feels comfortable to contribute. So thanks for letting me talk for a little while, monologue there.
Thank you, Admiral. You're getting hand claps throughout, and I see the chat people saying the same. We are at the top of the hour. So for those of you that want to log off, thank you. And I'm going to go ahead and go right into the after party. And before I call on you, Andrea, do you have any last comments just for the top of the hour?
Thank you so much for the thoughtfulness and feedback. And like I said, it's just time to leverage right place, right time, right people, and keep moving forward. And even for those of you who are retired in the audience, just know that you continue to have such an impact on me and the others who are in this fight. So thank you again for your time and continued efforts from the other side.
Thank you, Andrea. Des, you had your hand up. Go ahead.
Yes, ma'am. Real quick. I just want to say, as an XO, planning and scheduling at PP4T is very important for me. And you plan out so that you can execute as best as possible. I just want to say I had my haircut scheduled for 4 o'clock 2 weeks ago. And then I got notification for this session with Andrea as a guest speaker. And I changed my haircut to 2:30 to make sure I was going to be here. Thanks, Andrea. You're awesome.
Story. Thank you so
I mean, is there any greater love, right, than changing your haircut appointment? There is no greater love than that.
Your hair looks pretty good, Des.
Yeah, I'd say the only other thing is if you go across the HRBT for coffee with me, that's true love as well in this area.
It's coming. It's coming.
Okay, you too.
I'm going to shift the whole ship schedule around to get coffee with you. I'm going to figure it out.
Pat, go ahead.
Well, hi, everybody. And thank you, Andrea, for all you're doing. And also for the other women who are submariners and the guys who have served with them. I did 3 tours in the submarine community with Newark many years before women went to sea on submarines. And one of the concerns that I heard about women on submarines was on the fast attack. I mean, the bigger boats are, it's easy to put women on those. But like I commented on the Seawolf and the Virginia class that were being built or about to be built, that the plans that I saw and what I heard was they would on day one have sailors hot rack. And yet people wanted to put women on there. And my concern was they will take a bad situation and make it worse and blame the women, which is what we saw in some of the surface ships. And I was just wondering, now that there are, you know, when you said 300 women submarine officers, I think that's amazing. So how is that all working? And is that still something to be concerned about?
Yes, ma'am. It is so command specific. And I know, I wish I could give you the panacea, you know, kind of answer that it's fine for everyone everywhere, but really the way that women are treated is in a lot of cases dictated by their chains of command or by, you know, their department head peers. I will say for the most part, though, by having a network like Submarine Officer Women's Network, or, you know, by having these discussion forums, by having, you know, I have a group thread of 4 department head women, and we just, in the middle of work, we can get on Facebook Messenger now and chat with each other in situ if something crazy is going on. You know, those peer networks certainly help mitigate the effects of those more toxic chains of command, but it is so specific. So, you know, I have friends who are serving on the Norfolk waterfront who are having a tougher time than others. And then, you know, meanwhile, I'm not an operational boat, but I'm with a chain of command that is incredibly healthy and where I feel very validated that if something did go wrong, you know, nobody would ever turn and point and say, you know, it's because of the NAV's attitude or the NAV's, you know, emotions. It's very much so just based off of, you know, all of us being treated as professionals. So overall trend, though, where I feel heartened, though, is it's like you said, is you're integrating on these platforms where you're even more confined and there's even less space and less ability to you know, kind of have time away from each other. More so than anything else, that ride that I did with Indiana from October to November was just incredible to see, because it was, like you said, a complete paradigm shift for me, where I'd gone from this environment where a lot of our identities on Ohio were heightened, you know, by the stressors of the boat and just by the kind of the culture of the chain of command, to then go to Indiana, where again, I saw this girl who was class of 2020 who just didn't even on a day-to-day basis think about her identity, other than the fact that she slept in the bunk room where the women were staying, our little 5-man bunk room. Other than that, it made absolutely no difference to her. And you know, I had the overt conversation with her. I asked, you know, do you think about these things? Like, does it ever come up for you? And she's like, no, ma'am. Like, it's just, I'm just here trying to qualify. And it was like, so, you know, it is command specific, but I think there are more commands that are acknowledging, you know, these ideals that we talked about, where, you know, you foster that unity of diversity and, you know, make that the expectation and kind of leave it at that for people to thrive.
That's such a great answer. I love it. I love the contextual answer that you're giving. I was about to be like, well, I think 300 was only half. Didn't you say there were 600? And I'm like, your answer is so much better. Oh my gosh, I love it. Bob, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm involved in a different organization. It's not this outside the military that's struggling with DEI, because the emphasis of some people is that DEI is almost the stress between a DEI focus and the greater mission. And it seems to me that what's working in the commands that Andrea talks about, where it's working, is that the things that bring people together are focused on as more important than the differences. The differences are important to recognize, but what are the things that we all share in common? And in some organizations, and the one that I'm talking about that remain nameless, it's almost like the DEI piece is supplanting the mission of the organization, and there's a tension there, but I don't think that's probably the case in the Navy, since there is a common belief in the mission as a unifying force. So, and I really appreciated hearing from you, Andrea. I've been out of the Navy 17 years, and my goodness, things have come a long way. I did read Jim Jewell's book, and one of the things I thought he did really well is he brought people together on what they all had in common, as opposed to the differences, and that seems to be the real key to successful integration.
Love it. Thanks, Bob. Rachel, do you have something?
Yeah, just in response to Bob, your comment there about DEI being at odds with the mission. I just ran across a couple of days ago this great framework by a commander in the Coast Guard, who I'll make a plug for her, Emily. She would probably be a fantastic guest speaker here, Commander Kimberly Young McClear. And she's got this triangle framework. Psychological safety is the foundation, moves up through like moral courage and inclusion, leading to diversity and equity, to mission preparedness, mission readiness, and then innovation. Like connecting the dots that you can't have one without the other. They're not separate.
Thanks for sharing that, Rachel. And I will reach out. We do have right now, our next guest is the well, I won't say because it's not official yet, but I am looking at the Coast Guard as well. There's lots of great opportunities to learn. Okay, I didn't stop recording. Is there anyone else who wanted to share? I'm going to say thanks, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and stop recording for those who are listening. Stop the recording.